When it comes to count and cross stitch, can you just leave off all of the back stitching? I don't think the answer is whether you can leave off the back stitching, because it's your project and you can do absolutely anything you want to do with it. But maybe you shouldn't leave off the back stitching. I'm Michelle, this is my romantic tangle. Let's talk about back stitching. It's not always fun. I have done projects where the back stitching was really fun and made the project come to life, and I have done projects where it was just a miserable slog. I tend not to skip the back stitching myself, or I tend not to skip much of the back stitching myself. And I'm going to show you when and why and how, and I'm going to use projects that I have stitched because that's what I have here in my house. This one is ripe apples. There is some back stitching here in the stems of the apples and in the weave of the basket. I did it as charted, but I could have left out every last bit of back stitching, and unless someone who knew the project looked at it closely, nobody walking through my living room seeing this hanging on the wall would ever have been able to tell that I left off the back stitching. I could have, I didn't, and I thought this basket was hard. The back stitching was hard. So, wasn't fun, didn't bring out a tremendous amount of life in the piece, but it is what it is. Hedgehogs and lingonberries is kind of a middle ground. If you look closely, you will see there are little bits of back stitching that give the hedgehogs their prickles, or some definition to the prickles. I don't think this is all back stitched as charted. I think I improvised a bit because figuring out where along his back to get all of those little prickles was hard, and in the end I don't think it mattered if my placement was or was not perfect. I could have left out the back stitching. I think it would have left a little detail out of the finished piece. I don't think it would have mattered in the grand scheme of things. I could have gotten away with it. And really, what I think it comes down to is, can you get away with it? And do you like the way that it looks? That's up to you. It's yours. There are pieces where the back stitching absolutely totally makes the design. You could not have this barn without the back stitching. I would say more than 50% of the stitches in this thing are back stitching. It was fun. This is one of the projects where I enjoyed the back stitching. Yes, I fussed a bit with the tree, but the boards of the barn, I enjoyed it. And there is, I mean, the cloud is back stitching, the boards of the barn, the tree. This is a project that relies on back stitching. If you don't want to back stitch, if you don't like back stitching, you probably should not pick this as something you want to stitch, because you're not going to leave it out. And I am seeing more and more projects these days where the back stitching is such a major element of what makes it magical that you can't not do the back stitching. Ironwork Gate by Graphs by Barbara and Cheryl is another one. Almost, so the posts of the gate, there are a couple of random cross stitches in there and this little bit at the bottom. Otherwise, that entire gate is back stitching. You wouldn't stitch Ironwork Gate without the gate. That just, nobody's going to do that. There are a couple little bits around the windows that I could have left off if I had felt so inclined, but the gate had to be stitched. And this is another one where it comes down to choosing your project. I know that when you're buying things on patterns online, it can be hard to tell by looking at the picture what is and isn't back stitching. Sometimes it is super obvious. So if it is super important to you whether or not a project has back stitching, go on one of the forums and ask. Or look at posts by someone who has done it. Then there's some middle ground. I can't remember the name of this one. It's a long discontinued chart. I could have left off the back stitching on the windows and the branches of the trees. The wheels of his horse's cart are backstitched. Obviously, I could not have left those out. So I could have, if I had felt so inclined, cut down substantially on the backstitching in this project. Others, like the lighthouse, beacon at daybreak, I think. It's a Dimensions Gold Petites. You can see I've done part of the backstitching up here on the lighthouse tower. In my opinion, well, it needs to be there or you would not have the railings. Going down the tower, I think it adds a substantial amount of definition to the outline of the tower. I would not leave it off. I have seen people make the choice to leave off backstitching that they say it doesn't make a difference. When I look at the project, I think it makes a difference and I might not leave it off, but it is your stitching. You can do what you want with it. This is Morning Lake, and I have not backstitched the cabin yet or the dock. I hope that since I plan on going to all the trouble of backstitching the cabin and the dock and the boat, I hope that it makes a substantial difference in the finished product. I trust that it will, but I think I could leave, if I wanted to, I could probably leave the backstitching off of this and get away with it. And it's mine. It's going to hang on my wall. Nobody but me cares. So there are projects where you can absolutely leave it off and no one will notice. There are projects where the backstitching defines the entire piece and you can't do it without the backstitching. And there are projects that are in the middle that it is personal choice. What I would suggest if you really, truly hate backstitching, I complain about it, but in the end, I don't actively hate it. I don't mind it all that much. Look at the patterns you want to stitch before you commit to buying the materials for them. You can go look at the discussion groups. You can look at people's pictures on Instagram or wherever and get a sense of how much backstitching is involved and whether or not you actually want to commit yourself to that. If you hate backstitching, don't buy yourself kits that rely on a ton of heavy backstitching. If you love backstitching, then go pick out something that relies on the backstitching to make it pop. It's your project. It is your time. Decide what is important to you and whether or not you want to do it. And if you are in the midst of a project and you are on the fence about the backstitching, go do a search. See if someone has posted before and after backstitching pictures on that particular project, because there are a lot of them out there. And look at the before and after, or compare your piece to the finished image that came with your kit or your chart, and make up your own mind what you want to do. Let me know in the comments section below. Do you backstitch? Do you like backstitching? Is it a necessary chore you slog through, which is what I do with, that's going to be what it is on this one and what it is on a lot of my pieces. Sometimes, like I said, the elements, you need the wheels on the wagon, you need the sign on the building, and then you get a lot of impact for the time you put in stitching for that. On some of these, like the back stitching on the basket, you can't tell the difference after it's done. I love the basket. I love the project. It was a challenge. I just don't feel that the back stitching was a make it or break it element. Let me know how you feel about back stitching. Do you choose or avoid projects based on how much back stitching is involved? I've got a lot of those older patterns where everything is outlined, I think just for the sake of outlining it, and I should have pulled out Little Girl's Fancy because, oh my gosh, that thing has a ton of back stitching, and it does make a big difference in the finished product. Love it or hate it, back stitching is a thing that's in some of our counted cross stitch. You can quite easily find a lot of projects that don't have a single back stitch in them. Or you can find projects that are nothing but. Figure out what works for you, stitch that, and have fun with your stitching. I'm Michelle. This is my romantic tangle. Thank you so much for watching. I'll be back with you with more videos soon.